All right, our first speaker this afternoon is Lecia Brooks from the Southern Poverty Law Center. The SPLC is dedicated to fighting hate and bigotry and to seeking justice for the most vulnerable members of our society through the use of litigation, education, and other forms of advocacy. Lecia Brooks earned a degree in political science at the Loyola Marymount University, and she joined the SPLC in 2004 and has worked in a variety of positions, most recently as Director of Outreach. Please welcome Lecia Brooks.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Afternoon. Hello? Oh, just to make sure you're there. I'm from the South.
There we go.
Ready?
Yep.
I'm gonna move it. Sorry. I'm just gonna move this.
Sure.
Okay. Thank you.
Right here? Great. You got it. Make sure it stays plugged in.
Okay. Sorry. Let me just first invite those you all that just came in. Come on up here. There's plenty of seats right here. I'll wait. Come on. There's stuff on the table. Come. Thank you. This gentleman came all on his own. I was so proud of you.
He did.
But anyway, you all can come around too, ma'am. If you want to pull up the wheelchair to the table, you just move the chair out. Okay. Because there are goodies over here. You don't know what you're missing. Okay. Thank you. Okay. Thank you, Bill. You have a great voice. Thank you for introducing me. I'm really, really happy to be here today. How many members of the Southern Poverty Law Center are in the audience? Oh, thank you. Thanks for coming. I know that Morris sent you an invitation, and he'll be pleased to know that you got it and that you came to the Trialogue series today. I'm happy to be here to support OCCJ and the community of Tulsa. Now, I know that we're supposed to look at the landscape of hate and intolerance in America today, but I have to present kind of a historical look at that, because I think it's important to put things into context. So I'm just going to give a little bit of a review of where we've come from, so we can see, one, how far we've come, and then kind of see where we are, and maybe learn some things from the past as well. Also, by way of introduction to the work of the Southern Poverty Law Center. Now, what you see behind you is the Civil Rights Memorial, which is in Montgomery, Alabama. This beautiful memorial was designed by Maya Lin. And the reason I like to show it at the beginning of my presentations is because of the quote that's on the wall from Dr. King. He delivered this line during his speech on the March on Washington, which we're celebrating the 50th anniversary of this year. It says, "Until justice rolls down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream." Now, Dr. King paraphrased the Prophet Omas with this line. It inspires me and inspires my colleagues at the Southern Poverty Law Center to keep doing what we're doing. If I could paraphrase Mr. Bernstein, like, there's still work to be done. So I appreciate that. The memorial chronicles the major events of the civil rights movement beginning in 1954 with the Brown versus Board of Education case. But most importantly, probably for me, is that it honors 40 individuals who were killed during that time. Granted, more than 40 people died during the civil rights movement, but it names 40 people. People like the 4 girls who were killed at the 16th Street bombing in 1963, also celebrating that 50th anniversary. People like Medgar Evers. And I think it's important that we pause and remember those names, some of the martyrs of the movement, because we need to remember. We need to remember that they're not just nameless people or kind of, faces that we've come to, especially in the case of the 4 little girls, to call them the 4 little girls. They had names. There were 4 individuals: Addie Mae Collins, Denise McNair, Carol Robertson, and Cynthia Wesley. on the memorial, and I'm speeding up a little bit because I've got a timekeeper here. On the memorial, between the first entry and the last, between 1954 and then 1968, the assassination of Dr. King, Maya Lin left this open space called an open timeline to honor people who are not named on the memorial who died, but to also bring attention to the fact that people fought for social justice before 1954 and continue to do so since 1968. Then more importantly, I think, not more importantly, but equally important, is that we need to remember that people will continue to die for the cause of social justice. And recently, and this ties in with today's trialogue, I just feel that every opportunity I have, I should bring honor and attention to the 6 individuals who were killed at the Sikh temple shooting in Oak Creek, Wisconsin. You may not even know their names, and so I just want to say them. Paramgeet Kaur Sani, who's a mother of 2. Parkesh Singh, who was the father who told his children to hide and probably saved their lives. Suvaj Singh, who was a retired farmer. He moved to Wisconsin to be with his family. Santok and Rajit Singh, who were brothers. And Sawat Singh, the president of the temple. So now we can add their names, their stories, to the narrative of the Civil Rights Memorial. Now, the Southern Poverty Law Center, we were birthed out of the Civil Rights Movement. And we probably, this woman represents the first case where we kind of garnered national attention. This is Beulah Mae Donald, and she lived in Mobile, Alabama, and in 1981, her son Michael Donald was abducted by 2 members of a Klan organization called the United Klans of America. And the image that follows is a picture of Michael Donald. It's sometimes referred to as the last lynching. 1981, abducted and lynched from a tree in Mobile, Alabama. Well, Morris Dees decided that we should sue the Klan. And then it was a kind of a novel, it was a novel legal strategy to sue the Klan in civil court. And he came back with a $7 million judgment in Mrs. Donald's favor. So that's what we decided to do in 1981 to address hate groups and ongoing hate crime in Alabama. Since then, we've had about maybe 15 or so major civil suit victories against Klan and other white supremacist organizations. For instance, this case against the Aryan Nation in Idaho in the mid-1990s. There was also a case against another Klan organization in '99 that this Klan group was burning black churches. So and then our most recent case against the United Klans of America in Kentucky. That was in 2008. Now, part of our strategy is, of course, to put these organizations out of business. And though we're proud of the victories that we've had, they're very important and very significant. They have not stopped hate crime or hate groups, the existence of hate groups in the United States. What you see behind you and what you have on your table in front of you is a map of active hate groups in the United States. Every year we do an accounting of the number of active hate groups in the United States. Now, we define a hate group as any group or organization that denigrates an entire group of people based on primarily their immutable characteristics. Okay. The groups do not have to have committed any criminal act to be named on our hate map, but they do have to kind of teach against or promote intolerance against a group of people and invite other people to join them. So the map is not representative of lone wolves or just individuals, but really groups. And most often these groups have mailing lists and recruit other people, and the reason why it's important for us to name and call out hate groups is because we believe that hate groups produce hate crimes. Now, most of us are familiar with this image of a Klan cross burning, and you can kind of easily identify them. If you saw that, we're like, oh my gosh, it's a hate group, a hate crime is taking place, right? You might even be able to easily identify these folks as being members of a hate group because, you know, they're exercising their First Amendment right to protest, but with Nazi images. But what's not always so clear is how do we identify people like him? This is Fred Phelps, pastor of West Bureau Baptist Church in Topeka, Kansas, the man in the church who goes around to the funerals of dead soldiers and says that they had died because the United States is too soft on homosexuals. I was in Topeka for King Day, and I had an opportunity to go by and see the place because I was like, oh my gosh, I've got to go see Westboro Baptist Church. It's a house in a neighborhood. I would be so upset if I was his neighbor. He has a huge God hates fag sign right there in the front yard. Also, it's important to note, as far as our hate group listing, it's not just white supremacists or, you know, Nazi groups or Klan organizations, but also some groups of black separatists and other groups who vilify groups of people. So the Nation of Islam and Minister Farrakhan have been on the hate group list for some time because of their anti-white, anti-Semitic, and anti-gay rhetoric. Recently added, kind of in that vein, or in the vein of Westboro Baptist Church, is Reverend Terry Jones. It's so hard for me to say, you know, Reverend and Terry Jones at the same time. He's in Gainesville, Florida, and this is the guy who wanted to sponsor the Burn the Quran Day. Remember? And he did do it after, you know, international attention was brought to Florida, and he was asked not to do it. He apparently did it on his own sometime after the fact. But what he's also doing, he didn't just stop there. He consistently preaches this message of hate and intolerance and Islamophobia. He you know, they created T-shirts, and people wear T-shirts in the street as they protest. I just rarely have seen anything I think is so disgusting. What we've noticed as we continue to monitor hate groups in the United States is that there's been a 70% increase since the year 2000. And here's the map, the pullout for Oklahoma. 13 hate groups. You could go to our website, you could see it kind of we're on the sheet that's in front of you as well. But just the groups that got my attention is that in Tulsa, you have a neo-Nazi group called the National Socialist Freedom Movement, and you also have a neo-Nazi group, the National Socialist Movement in Oklahoma City. I think it's important for me to say that the National Socialist Movement is the largest white supremacist group in the country. They have over 250,000 registered users on their website, and they're pretty bad characters. You also have a black separatist group called the Israelite Church of God in Jesus Christ in Tulsa, and in addition to being black separatists, they're more of a fundamentalist group, one of those groups that kind of fuses religious traditionalism with racial superiority, whereby they believe that they're the chosen people and represent the lost tribes of Israel. That's who they are. If you go to the website, you can get the complete listing. I always recommend people kind of look up their neighbors, see who's in the neighborhood. So you can know. I mean, you can't fight it. You can't fight your enemy if you don't know kind of who's there. In this map, here's the 70% increase that I mentioned, and you can see kind of it's just gone up steadily since the year 2000. So we've identified a couple different drivers of this increase in hate groups, and one would be the shifting demographics in the United States. And we've been talking about this for some time, that the country is changing. I think it just came into, it just became clear for folks after the presidential election, and you know, they were kind of looking at voter patterns. But in 1970, 83% of the U.S. population was white, and just 17% people of color, and that, you know, for the most part, felt comfortable for a lot of people. And then a lot of the people of color were in kind of states on the coast, California, New York, border states. But now you look at the demographics today, and it's a lot different. It's 66% white, 34% people of color. Now that has had kind of a striking impact on people who are not used to diversity. I'll just say, kind of freaking out about it. There's no better way to put it. Even though it's been predicted in places like the Southeast and Middle America, it's just beginning to shift, and people think that they can change that, and they cannot. The second driver of the increase in hate crimes, of course, is President Obama. We've noted an increase since 2008, not only in the number of active hate groups, but also we do a separate accounting for anti-government groups, patriot groups, militia groups, that kind of thing, and there was over 500% increase. They went straight up from 2008 to the present time. There wasn't this anti-government furor until President Obama came on the scene. The third driver that we identify as aiding in the increase in the number of hate groups would be the economy. Whenever there's a lull in the economy, people look for scapegoats, and this just happens all the time. 1 in 5 Americans is experiencing what is called economic insecurity, and what happens is people need to kind of hold someone responsible for that. And what typically happens is that they hold newcomers or immigrants or anyone who they think is keeping them from getting a job. So those are the 3 main drivers. But what also kind of happens in the public square is this consistent rhetoric, this dehumanizing rhetoric, be it about immigration or be it about demographics. This is a former governor of New Hampshire, John Sununu, and you may recall during the presidential campaign he at one point said, I wish the president would learn how to be an American, something like that. I have the exact quote. Yes, I wish the president would learn how to be an American. And this kind of adds fuel to the fire for the anti-Obama folks anyway, people who are upset about kind of his race, his racial background, and then people who continue to insist that he's a Muslim and feeds their Islamophobia. And then you have people like Newt Gingrich, who's always saying something, but for our purposes, looking at Islamophobia, he said a couple of things like when there was that whole furor over building the so-called Ground Zero Mosque, which wasn't at Ground Zero, which wasn't a mosque. He said New York should ban the so-called Ground Zero Mosques so long as there are no churches or synagogues in Saudi Arabia. Brilliant, just brilliant. There are over 100 mosques in New York already. Then he also said, and he always comments about Obama. He toned it down a little bit during, when he was in contention. But he said, Obama operates from a Kenyan anti-colonial framework and only pretends to be a person who is normal, reasonable, and moderate. So I share that with you because it's important what our elected officials, what politicians, what pundits say, and what they put into the air, because people pick that up. Not only people who associate with hate groups, but just kind of regular, ordinary people. I don't know what news station you listen to, but Fox News picks this stuff up and runs with it. And then people come to believe it. And this is what, this in turn leads to these horrific hate crimes that we're having. Oh, here's that anti-militia thing that I was telling you about. I didn't realize I had that slide. See, there it is. 2008, the number of anti-government groups shot up. And the last time we saw this kind of anti-government fervor, the Oklahoma City bombing happened. And we tried to bring this to the attention of Homeland Security a couple of years ago, and Janet Napolitano was going to, well, they did issue a report on the state of domestic terrorism in the United States, which used a lot of the SPLC data, and then they were accused of buying into the leftist agenda of the Southern Poverty Law Center, and the report was destroyed, and the unit that was responsible for tracking domestic terrorism was closed. And yet we still have these horrific hate crimes. We have a pattern of Islamophobia, anti-Muslim, and anti-Arab hate in the United States in the wake of the tragic events of September 11, 2001. And we all remember the tragic events of September 11, but what we need to pay attention, I think, of course, never forget what happened, but we need to really pay attention to what we're creating now, because it is now an era of anti-Islamic and anti-Arab sentiment that is becoming part of our institutions. It's institutionalized in TSA, in mass surveillance that happens in large cities like New York. It's dangerous. It leads people to burn mosques, like the mosque that was burned in Joplin, Missouri, in 2000, last year, I believe. And then there was another arson or burning of a mosque in Toledo, Ohio. And this started probably a couple years ago with that mosque arson that took place in Tennessee. Remember, they burned it to the ground. Took them a couple of times to destroy it, and then the community was going to rebuild it and has been trying to rebuild it for 2 years. Just recently opened. Then community members wanted to stop them from building it. But it just recently opened. It's important to pay attention to kind of the hate that's directed towards Muslims or folks who are perceived to be Muslim, and recognize that that other groups are being attacked as a result of that anti-Muslim sentiment. And here I talk about Sikhs. There's been just a tremendous increase in the number of anti-Sikh hate crimes, which we believe are a result of anti-Muslim sentiment. These folks who commit these crimes can't apparently tell the difference between Muslims and Sikhs. It also, Hindus are also caught up in this hate as well. So it's been happening since September 11th. This is Balbir Sodi. He was killed 4 days after September 11th in Mesa, Arizona, and I fear that no one even remembers who he was. 4 days after September 11th, he was killed, and this was the first anti-Sikh, anti-Muslim hate crime in the United States. The Southern Poverty Law Center has a project called the Intelligence Project. It's the group that tracks and monitors hate groups and puts out the hate map. We also publish a magazine quarterly and make it available for free to law enforcement officers, Homeland Security, and such. We were the first. This is Wade Michael Page, who was the shooter at the Sikh temple in Wisconsin, and SPLC was the first to identify him as being connected to white supremacist groups, and we've had him in our databases for about 10 years. But least we forget, now this is a bit of a segue, it's easy to, I think, tag and maybe not even understand, but tag and identify somebody like Wade Michael Page, who, has Nazi symbols all around him and is an avowed white supremacist. But sometimes it's not so easy to identify these like kids, right? These are 5 young people who live in upstate New York, and they called themselves the Caucasian Crew. Don't ask me why, the Dominican was a member, but they were called the Caucasian Crew. And what happened is that they would make sport of attacking Latinos or people they perceived to be Latino, because in their particular community in upstate New York, I guess, there weren't a lot of Latinos. But I also, because I'm a real advocate for youth, and I believe, as NCCJ taught me, no one's born a bigot, somebody taught these kids to dehumanize Latinos and Hispanics. They didn't just get this on their own. It was something, again, going back to what I was talking about earlier about what's in the air and how the public discourse influences hate crimes. So they came across this man, Marcelo Lucero, who was a Guatemalan immigrant, documented, had been in New York for 10 years. They beat him up and killed him. Now, those 5 kids are in prison for the rest of their lives, and Marcelo Lucero is dead, and they're convicted of a hate crime. This is James Anderson. You may have heard about him, and I'm always surprised when people haven't. This is the man that was killed in Jackson, Mississippi last year, who was run over by a group of teenagers in a truck. That was all captured on video. And if you don't know this story, you can Google it and pull it up on CNN. The whole story's there. Another tragedy, because these are young people. They lived in a suburb of Jackson, Mississippi, and their whole group would make sport of going to attack black people in Jackson. Also, they also said that they would attack people that they thought were poor. So how does this happen? How does this happen? That kids get in their minds like, okay, yeah, let's go beat up some black people. And what happened that night is just horrific. Brandon, I think he's the one on your left. He's the one who drove the car that ran over Mr. Anderson. He doesn't even know why he did it. And after he did it, he went and met his friends at McDonald's, and now he'll be in prison the rest of his life, and 5 other people have been convicted. And I am on time. So I've been going around the country the last couple of weeks for King Day presentations, and so I've been pulling up a lot of King quotes. And it's important for me as I kind of work in the world of hate and in the world of tolerance to kind of balance this out, or try to kind of come to some understanding of why we're in the situations that we're in. And so King quotes often help me maintain some balance. So I really do believe this too. King said, people fail to get along because they fear each other. They fear each other because they don't know each other. They don't know each other because they have not communicated with each other. I know that's one of the things that OCCJ does and does well. I know that the whole idea of the trialogue is that we can begin to communicate with one another. And so I would encourage you to keep doing what you're doing in Tulsa and not stop just at coming to the trialogues, but begin to or continue to communicate with people that don't come to these events, right? And expand your circle. Thank you. Am I supposed to take questions now?
We're gonna have folks bring questions forward, and then we'll take those. So, thank you, Lecia. We're going to have you turn your questions in, if you would. We've got the committee is going to stand up and gather those. If you've got some, please pick those up and get those to her, and she'll come right back up. Very good. Thank you.
Okay, regarding the government spying on people without court approval, doesn't this make us safer watching the hate groups? This is from an ACLU supporter. Thank you. I support the ACLU too. My short answer, no, it doesn't make us safer. Does not. It increases, I think, and this is just my opinion, it increases our paranoia and anxiety about one another when we understand that our government is spying on us. It just increases the tension. So that's not something that'll make us safe. Also, it has the effect of making people not trust the government and not trust law enforcement in particular, and that's never a good idea, because we want to have an open relationship between the community members and law enforcement or any governmental entity, because you know, they need to be able to tell them when something really is truly going on. How do you keep your sanity and not become as they? You know, the thing is that I'm really lucky. I get to meet people like you. Like, I get to meet people who I know support inclusion and support interfaith efforts, that are troubled as I am, that hate continues to exist and want to do something about it. I get to meet people like you all the time. And then when I'm in Montgomery at the Civil Rights Memorial Center, people come in all the time, and I meet young people all the time. And I know that we far outnumber the bad guys. I know that. What keeps me up at night, though, is that I want us to do more. You know, and I don't want us to become complacent, because it's one thing to know that you're there. It makes me feel good, but I need to know that you're doing something, right? I need to know, and not just me, outside of me, but people who are suffering as a result of, say, Islamophobia or anti-immigrant sentiment, people who are suffering today as victims of hate and intolerance based on who they are. They're suffering, and they need us to speak out. They need us to speak out against the rhetoric, the lies, the misinformation that we hear from our elected officials, from pundits on television. Whenever you encounter intolerant speech or biased speech, you need to speak out. That would make me feel better, and that would help the people who are suffering. Okay, what does SPLC recommend to get young folks engaged? Well, I recommend OCCJ. You know, it worked for me. My story, and we don't have time for it today, is that I went to Brotherhood Sisterhood Camp, which was an outgrowth of Anytown, which I know OCCJ still sponsors. I went to that program when I was in high school, and it literally changed my life. So I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing today if I didn't participate in that program, and I'm really, really happy about it. So I think young people need opportunities to come together and talk about issues of identity and oppression, because they're interested, and at a young age, you're made to feel like you can make a difference. Does SPLC make any effort to dialogue with hate groups? Yes, we do. We have a really good story of redemption. I don't know if anyone saw the film Erasing Hate. It was a special on MSNBC. Lawrence O'Donnell. Well, look it up. It's called Erasing Hate. This guy, Brian Widener, who was an avowed hammerskin skinhead, and he was a scary, scary guy. He had tattoos all over his face. Maybe you saw images of all over. He would beat up people, black people, you know, Latinos. He hated everybody, gays, everybody. And then he wanted to get out of it because he had a child, and he wanted to change things. He came to us and asked us to stop writing stories about the Hammerskins and making them look good. We were just writing about them. And so, anyway, we talked, and he wanted to get out of that life, but he couldn't because he had tattoos over his whole face. So an SPLC supporter gave us the money to have him go through tattoo removal, and it took over a year, almost 2 years. And you know, and now I know Brian, his wife, you know, kids. Yeah. So yeah, we'll engage in dialogue with them. Should I stop?
Nope, you've got about 5-6 more minutes.
Okay. Has there been any attempt to encourage interracial experiences like the Trialogue from SPLC? I would say, no, what SPLC does is that we're more like a publishing platform. We research and gather the data and put it out there and give it to people for free because of our supporters. Things like the Intelligence Project, the information on hate groups, making this information available to law enforcement officials who you know, government can't track and monitor its own citizens, but we can, so we provide that information for them. We also provide trainings for law enforcement officers. Our program, Teaching Tolerance, provides free resources to educators so that they can promote diversity and acceptance in their classrooms and hopefully kind of keep changing future generations. And then we sue people. And that's how we encourage dialogue. No. Sometimes, you know, you try to talk to people, but litigation works. Why do so many Jewish people consider those who consider those who, all right.
Something, Israeli
government policies. Oh, okay, why do so many Jewish people consider those who condemn Israeli government policies to be anti-Semite? Well, I'm not Jewish, but I've heard out of order. Yeah. Come to a dialogue about that, and it's not as simple as that. It would be anti-Israeli, not necessarily anti-Semitic. Do large financial awards put the groups out of business? What's the follow-up? Yes. That's our goal, is to bankrupt the organization. Going back to the Donald case in 1981, when Mrs. Donald got a $7 million judgment, of course she didn't get $7 million. They didn't have $7 million. But you kind of seize all their assets up to that amount and bankrupt them and make it impossible for them to ever reorganize as a hate group. So that's our strategy. The Southern Poverty Law Center is a nonprofit organization, so we don't charge our clients to represent them, nor do we share in any of the award money. But we'll work, you know, until the people are dead to get their money back. Like this, we'll keep seizing their assets and we stay on top of them and monitor them. Now they've gotten, like this last case in 2008, Ron Edwards and the Imperial Clans of America, you know, tried to hide some money when we said we were going to sue them, and he tried to hide it and give it to his wife, and you know, this and this and this. We just trace it, and we'll continue to trace any money that they ever have, so that he never has any money. He's in jail now, though, because he had to go into criminal pursuits and started selling meth, and you know, if he makes any money off meth sales, we'll get that money too. Are there any people of tolerance going to hate groups, as Reverend Will Campbell did? I'm sorry, I don't know who he is. Or to bridge to relate. I don't know what that means. Sure. I mean, I don't know. Even as I say sure. I mean, people are people, and people could be tolerant one day and feel like they've been wronged and find themselves affiliated with hate groups. Let me say this. This allows me to say another one of my other pet peeves. Not pet peeves, but one of my observations. That what's happening a lot with hate groups, that they don't have a real strong, members don't necessarily have a real strong hate ideology, but they end up joining some group who we've identified as a hate group because it feeds into their biased thinking, right? A couple years ago, we started naming some groups as anti-gay, like the Family Research Council. I don't know if you remember, but we named it as a hate group. And organizations like the Family Research Council, or even groups who are, we call nativist hate groups, who are xenophobic and are against immigration of any kind, people sometimes join their groups or their efforts because it feeds into their beliefs that, oh, too many immigrants, oh, gay is wrong, oh, that kind of thing. So people who would think of themselves as tolerant and accepting sometimes find themselves on the wrong side of it and don't even know that they're affiliated with a hate group.
Let's do one more.
Okay. Black and Hispanics comprise about 20% of Tulsa's population. How do you suggest these communities become more involved in interfaith activities? I think you have to get their church leaders, right? You have to get them to be involved, and I assume that you have a pretty broad interfaith council already. And I would encourage you not to give up on them if they don't come. Just keep hounding them and make them come. Go pick them up and bring them with you. That's my recommendation. And then have some events. Ask them to host some events, so that they're not always coming to you, but that you're going to them. Start participating in their events. A lot of times people don't like to participate in collaboration or coalition work because they feel like people don't participate in their stuff. So go to their things. And then next thing you know, you'll be friends. That's all. Thank you.
That you might have. I want to then focus on some of the major factors, I think, that inhibit interfaith dialogue and cooperation, and then some comments on where we find hope for the perilous journey that we have ahead. Jewish-Christian-Muslim relations have had, as we all know, a long and often tumultuous history, especially when the adherents of any one tradition, and that's particularly been true in the case of Christianity and Islam, have been the dominant majority and have had a power relationship over the other religious communities. I would begin by saying, as a Christian, that Christians should be very slow to be pointing the finger of blame at others, particularly Muslims, for their behavior vis-a-vis minority religious communities. As a very good rabbi friend once put it to me rather poignantly, he said, I really love what's happening in Jewish-Christian relations. It's a new day. A lot of good things are happening. But you have to remember, this is all happening against a very large backdrop. And as he pointed out, he said, for us Jews, 2,000 years of Christian love has been almost more than we could bear. Well, when you look at the long history of anti-Semitic behavior, it is painful, to be sure, and it continues to this day. A great deal of progress has been made, certainly in the area of Jewish-Christian relations and in some quarters in Jewish-Christian-Muslim relations, but a great deal more remains to be done. And so I want to begin by making that point. Certainly with the presentation we've just heard, there's a great deal to be concerned about in terms of the hate groups that exist, not only in the country, but in our communities. But also, I want to underscore not just that ominous threat, but that the vast majority of what happens in terms of the violent mistreatment of other people comes not from overt hate groups, but often from people who perceive themselves as well-intentioned, but who, for whatever reasons, and there are a number of things I could mention and we'll talk about a little bit, have a level of ignorance and bias and prejudice and bigotry that lead them to justify doing all kinds of things, often in the name of their religion. Not in the name of a hate group, but in the name of their religion to other people. My own awareness of this began at an early age. As you can tell from the biographical sketch there, I'm a native of Tulsa, was born and raised in Tulsa and went to OSU, and then started a pilgrimage to the east, where my wife and I went to seminary in Kentucky and then on to Harvard, and then have spent 35 years on the East Coast in New York and Boston and the Carolinas. I was happily teaching at Wake Forest University and helping start a divinity school and leading the religion department when David Boren got his clutches on me and lured me back to the home state That's a whole other story, but if you ever get locked in a room with David Boren, you're a goner, I can tell you. Your home state needs you speech is very, very compelling when he puts it on you. Also, hold on to your wallet if you get in a room with David Boren as well. He's a remarkable leader. And so 5 years ago, we came back, and I'm heading the program at the University of Oklahoma, and we do a lot actually with OSU as well, a lot of joint initiatives there. My interest in comparative religion and awareness of the problems associated with prejudice and bias and bigotry began at a very early age. My grandfather, my father's father, was Jewish. Many of you in the room certainly know the story of Fiddler on the Roof. That was the story of our family, literally. My great-grandfather, paternal great-grandfather, was an Orthodox Jewish cantor, very devout, apparently very strong-willed, hard-fisted, devout Orthodox Jew. The family was forced out of the Poland-Russia area in the latter part of the 19th century in a Christian pogrom against the Jews. That's the story of Fiddler on the Roof. And they came, like many other immigrant families, and settled in Boston. Came through New York and settled in Boston, and there were 9 children. My grandfather was one of the 9 children. It's a very colorful story, more entertaining than what I'm going to talk about, but I will give you a little tidbit of this, and that is he and one of his brothers began on the street corners of Boston singing and dancing for pennies, and got pretty good, took their show on the road, and ended up becoming a very famous song and dance comedy team in vaudeville. They literally traveled the world. They went to Australia, Europe, all over the United States. We're in for a very rocky road ahead, even though, and I'm one who very much supports and encourages and hopes for revolutionary change in places where people have been living under brutal dictatorial rule. It is hard not to cheer them on for the kind of freedom that we celebrate on the 4th of July ourselves, but that doesn't mean it's easy to get from here to wherever it is people are trying to go, and we're going to see a variety of experiments. That really is a major focus of what I'm doing in the current book on religion and politics in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, looking at the history of that and of the current dynamics and sort of where can we go in the most constructive ways, knowing that there is no simple answer, there is no magic wand to wave that's going to fix everything, but what are the kinds of things we need to be thinking about and aware of. In the case of Islam, the challenges are particularly daunting because there is a long history. It makes a difference that Christians and Muslims have been encountering each other, often in fractious ways, but not always, down through the centuries in a way that isn't true of Christian-Buddhist relations or Christian-Hindu relations. Very, very different dynamic. Islam burst onto the scene and was a remarkable success, not only militarily, but as a civilizational system, as a religious system, just a remarkable success story that we didn't learn a whole lot about growing up in our history books, but in fact is the case that for many centuries Islam led the world as the great civilizational system that we actually, in fact, are heavily influenced and shaped by. When you hear politicians and others talk about the Judeo-Christian tradition in the West, they should be saying the Judeo-Christian Islamic tradition in the West. Western civilization is very much shaped by not only Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, but Greek thought and all kinds of other things that wove together in the process. But Islam was enormously important in that whole process. Many of the disciplines in the academic world come right out of Islam. Mathematics, chemistry, horticulture, astronomy, geometry, all these are rooted, many other things too, navigation, in the Islamic sciences. When European doctors were putting leeches on people in the Middle Ages, physicians in Baghdad who had already figured out the nervous system and the circulatory system and were performing delicate operations. One quick indication, my daughter is a high school math teacher, and she loves to point out that, you know, we use Arabic numerals. Where do you suppose we got the Arabic numerals from in our mathematical system? Wouldn't be the Arabs, would it? Algebra, an Arabic term. Alchemy, chemistry, an Arabic term. It goes on and on and on. Deeply connected and in very positive ways with the Islamic world in some ways, but also in very fractious ways, because Islam appeared on the scene and posed a real threat to Christendom. In fact, I would argue that it's the only religious system that ever really threatened Christianity. that once the church grew beyond its humble Jewish beginnings, there was really no other religious system that has ever really threatened Christianity except for Islam. And by that I mean threatened to just overwhelm it. Judaism was never going to overwhelm Christianity. As far as I know, Scandinavian mythology wasn't making a big run at overwhelming Christianity, or Native American spirituality, quite the contrary. But Islam comes onto the scene as a very successful religious tradition that talks about the one God, the same God that Jews and Christians talk about, that talks about Moses and Abraham and David and Jesus. Jesus is mentioned 93 times by name in the Quran. The Holy Spirit, the virgin birth, angels and devils, the day of judgment. For a lot of people, it sounded pretty much like my religion, except these guys are successful. And that really threatened the Christians of Europe especially in some very real ways, and I don't have to rehearse then crusades and inquisitions and a history of dynamics and interaction. I do mention that because I think that runs pretty deep. It runs deeper than we realize. Even if you don't perceive yourself as having grown up with an anti-Islamic bias, it is so deeply woven into the literature, so deeply woven into Western thinking, particularly coming out of Europe, that Islam is a threat. And it doesn't take a lot. I mean, we get extremists, we get fiery rhetoric from people on the extreme, and a lot of that comes easily to the surface in ways that most people don't even perceive is there. I mean, I know in Oklahoma, when I was growing up in the 8th grade, we had to read Dante's Inferno. Well, Muhammad and Ali are just a couple of rungs above Judas in Dante's Inferno. Those images were burned into your consciousness, and it goes right on down. There are very few people, St. Francis of Assisi, there are a few bright spots along the way, but most of the images of Islam are extraordinarily negative. Martin Luther wrote 3 books attacking Islam. Just to show you the level of intelligence, even of the great Protestant reformer, he wrote one book called On Diatribes Against the Turks, in which he declared the Quran as a vile and shameful book. He noted he'd never actually seen a copy of it, but he knew, nonetheless, it was a vile and shameful book. That's Martin Luther. You know, we're not talking here about minor actors. These are the major thinkers who shaped a lot of Christian theological thinking down through the centuries. There's a great deal that remains, and part of the challenge that we have is that there really are violent extremists in the world. There really are people doing horrific things and claiming inspiration from Islam. Now, I would maintain, and do maintain, that this is a very tiny fraction on the very edge of the larger Islamic world of 1.5 or so billion people. But even if it's a tiny fraction of 1%, and nobody knows what the percentages are, it's still a very dangerous reality because it doesn't take very many people to wreak havoc. 19 people hijacked the planes on September the 11th, and probably only a couple hundred more even knew about the plan. That's a very tiny number of people who literally, you could argue, changed the world. In fact, one measure of the kind of world that we live in and the dangers we face is seen in the example that was mentioned before of Terry Jones in Florida. This self-appointed leader has a church of less than 50 people outside of Gainesville, Florida, independent church, so there's no bishop to rein him in or no presbytery to say you can't do that. He can do whatever he wants in this little church. He puts online that he wants to burn the Quran on the 9th anniversary of 9/11. This goes viral, and within 36 hours, he's got a personal plea from the President of the United States, Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, General David Petraeus, who was commanding the forces abroad at the time, and the Pope. This one guy gets the attention of the President and the Pope for putting something online. Now that is a scary dynamic, and he was threatening to do something that's actually technically legal. It wasn't even an illegal, it's an offensive act. It's a grotesque thing to be doing, but it's not illegal to burn a book in the United States. And that is a reminder that even if we're talking about very small numbers of people, we're living in a time when small numbers of people can have an extraordinary impact, not just through hate groups, but in various ways. And of course, we just saw recently how one very disturbed young man can wreak havoc in elementary school. All kinds of things can happen with small numbers of people in the world in which we live today, sadly. We need a great deal of work in the area of education, particularly here, I would say, in Oklahoma, but not just in Oklahoma. It wasn't long ago that the citizens of our state passed with a 70% majority a ban on Sharia law and all international law, which was very cleverly written. I mean, it was so hastily done and so universally embraced that even the people who thought it was a good idea realized, wait a minute, what all international law? We can't do business with Sweden? Or what's that mean? It's just this sort of, generic fear of Islam. I've been doing an informal survey in the 2 years since that ban was adopted, or since that legislation or that referendum was passed, and I've talked to over 100 people, including a number of clergy. And I've yet to find anybody, apart from a couple of Muslim friends, who actually could tell me what Sharia law was. What I get is, well, no, you tell me. What is it? I do actually know what it is, but you tell me. What do you think it is? What are you afraid of? Well, it's coming. They're going to try and implement it. What are they trying to implement? People don't even have any idea what they're talking about. But they are convinced, it's coming for Perry, Oklahoma. And we're going to stop it. Have you ever met a Muslim? No, but we can't stand for this. For what? What are you afraid of? What is it? I know quite a number of Muslims in the state, and the population of Muslims in the state of Oklahoma is only 1% or so of the population. Most of the people I know are cardiologists and home builders. The largest home builders in the state of Oklahoma are two Muslim friends of mine based in Norman or Moore. I have all kinds of people that I know who are highly trained professionals, wonderful citizens. I haven't met a Muslim in the state of Oklahoma yet who has any interest in implementing Sharia law as a state in the state. It's very important for many of them in terms of their personal piety and practice and what they are trying to do in terms of what they think God wants them to do. Nothing unusual about that, but they're not trying to impose that on anyone. The level of fear and the level of ignorance continues to be, really mind-boggling. I could give many other examples, and I will, if we have time in the Q&A, a couple of those. One, I will say, since it's not Oklahoma, but I like to beat up on Texas, so I'll give an example from Texas. And by the way, in case you didn't know, does anybody know, raise your hand if you think you know the best thing ever to come out of Texas? Interstate 35. There you go. I've always liked that joke. In Texas, I gave a talk a few years ago at First Baptist Church of Austin. There were 500-600 people there. It was on the future for Christian-Muslim relations, and very well attended. It was a Baptist-sponsored event, actually, and very well attended. It all went great. I went back to Winston-Salem and was doing some interviews with a few people of the press as follow-up. And after I spoke, a prominent Muslim leader from Dallas had come down, and he responded, and then we engaged in a dialogue. Very well. Everything went great. Started getting, calls for some interviews, and I was just doing interviews. And I've been doing this for a long time, so I kind of know when I hear the booby traps and where the explosives might be, and so everything seemed pretty normal. And then suddenly this firestorm of controversy broke out across Texas, and I was getting emails from people literally all over the country who were saying, "What did you say in Texas? What in the world did you do down there?" And I said, "I just told you what I just told you." I said, "That's all." And, "Well, are you doing these interviews?" I said, "Yeah, I'm doing interviews, some follow-up interviews." And it turned out there was just a large number of churches who were ready to leave the Texas Baptist Convention because someone like me had been invited to speak. And they were saying, "Well, what's wrong with Kimball? I mean, he's a Baptist himself. What's the problem?" It's what he said. Well, what did he say? And the thing that they were angry about, and then I just kept doing the interviews, which made them angrier, was that he said that Jews, Christians, and Muslims all look to Abraham as their patriarch. And that was the controversy. And I kept doing interviews saying, look, go back, and you know, my speech was taped. I said at least 10 things that were genuinely controversial, but this isn't one of them. And what came back was, well, the Muslims can't have Abraham. And so I just kept, you know, I said, no, this is a pedagogical moment. This is a teachable moment. I'm not backing off this one. We've got to try and help people understand that, you know, it isn't your decision whether the Muslims think that Moses and Abraham are important prophets. Guess what? They have Jesus too. Oh, that was fun. And that one threw that one out. I say that just to say that, I mean, I thought I'd seen it all and heard it all, but that was a new one, that, you know, they were mad because someone who would dare to claim that Jews, Christians, and Muslims all saw Abraham as the patriarchal figure, the first monotheist, and that was the controversy. The level of ignorance, the level of fear that stands behind that is mind-boggling, you know, to say the least. We face a lot of challenges as we look for ways to move forward, and many of the things, let me stop at this moment here and do what my publishers have taught me well to do, and that is throw in a shameless plug for my 2 books that are available at a discounted price over here at the side table, where I really look at 5 of the major warning signs of religion going awry. If we look across the centuries and through the different religious traditions, I believe we can identify patterns of behavior where very sincere, devout people, or people who perceive themselves that way, end up justifying some of the most horrific things, not only in the name of religion, but that's what they think God wants them to do. Clearly, if you talk to most Muslims and they talk about Islam as a religion of peace, that is what it is. That's what it means. But there are clearly a small number of people whose behavior is anything but reflecting Islam as a religion of peace. As similarly, I would say, we see it's easy enough to say Jesus taught a gospel of love, but if you happen to be on the receiving end of some of the behavior of Christians down through the centuries, it feels like anything but a gospel of love. And a lot of people, you know, feel very justified in the way they go at these particular issues with God in their pocket. Anybody who thinks they know exactly what God wants for them and for everybody else is a disaster waiting to happen. May not become a disaster, but be careful, because if you're doing what God wants you to do, and you're convinced of it, no matter how heinous it may seem, we see throughout the centuries, justify almost anything. So where do we find some hope? We find hope, I think, first and foremost, in ongoing efforts at education. There's been a great deal that's already been accomplished. A great deal more is being done. The number of people who are taking courses in comparative religion and Islam, interfaith work, so forth, has increased dramatically. I've been all over the country. I've lectured in 250 universities over the years, and this is a very heartening sort of component, and churches all over the country. There have been all kinds of educational programs and continuing to be educational programs, even fairly conservative churches. It's not just churches who are left of center theologically, but quite a number of churches have really tried to learn more, and I know a number of Muslim leaders who have been just worn out by the number of invitations they've had from churches and from synagogues and temples to come and speak and talk to us and help us understand. So there's a great deal that's happening. At the same time, we do see others who have really dug in their heels, who are absolutely adamant and stronger and more vociferous than ever. And that's one of the real dangers I think we feel right now and see right now. In fact, it's because the people who are the most volatile, the most sensational, tend to get a lot more media attention. There's a lot more attention, paid to a Terry Jones or to the guy up in Kansas and his protests than to the hundreds of people who come out to an event like this. This might get some media attention, but give one kid, a bomb, and the television cameras can't get there fast enough. Part of the problem is just the way the media works. It tends to gravitate towards what is most dramatic and most sensational, and we have to bear that in mind. So we have to help people really humanize the other, especially when it comes to Islam. Terrible things are happening. Serious, terrible things are happening by people who are motivated or claim inspiration from Islam, but that is a very tiny minority. The largest Muslim country in the world is Indonesia. 200 million or so Muslims in Indonesia. What do you suppose those Indonesians are plotting to blow up right now? Well, most of them are doing exactly what we did today, trying to figure out how to get the kids fed and off to school, and which one's going to take care of the one who's sick, and how we're going to get to grandma's birthday party now, and oh, by the way, who's going to get the flat tire fixed, and don't you have a dentist appointment? How are we going to make all this work today? They're living normal lives like people everywhere else, and trying to raise their family and provide for a better future for their own families and their children and their communities and so forth. They're not plotting anything. How do we humanize? And I think that's the biggest challenge, and it was touched on already by several things that were said. And that's where not only education, but I think dialogical encounter is so important. When you actually know people, when you get to meet people, when you engage other people, and you hear someone say, Muslims are such, well, no, wait a minute, not the Muslims that I know. I mean, you start thinking of a real human being, someone who, you know, Muhammad, the guy who fills my prescriptions at CVS, well, he's not like that. So-and-so, and so, you know, you go down the list. And when you can put a human face on the other, it tends to make a lot of difference. It moves beyond academic learning to a very different kind of experiential level. Critically important. And part of the way you do that is through cooperative efforts in the community, not just education programs, but look for ways to work together in the community. All over the country, Jews, Christians, and Muslims, congregations have come together in different places to build Habitat for Humanity houses. You can actually do that without agreeing on who Jesus was. And you know, that's an important question for Jews, Christians, and Muslims. And not all see it the same way, obviously, but everybody agrees we ought to be trying to do something to help people who need help with this kind of housing, or to work on all kinds of issues in the community. I say if we can reach down and be the best Christians, the best Muslims, the best Jews we can be, and find ways to focus our energies on some common kinds of concerns, a lot of the theological differences, I think, over time will work themselves out. Last point, and that simply is do whatever you can to give visibility to those kinds of efforts, because the media drumbeat, of course, if it bleeds, it leads, as we know. We constantly need to get people aware of the good things that people are doing across interfaith lines, not only here, but elsewhere, and give attention to that, give people a model of something that's different and better and more hopeful, and I think we'll be moving at least in a much better direction toward a healthy and hopeful future. Thank you.
All right, folks, we're going to have you write your questions once again and hold them up, and our committee will come around and pick them up from you. So we'll just continue this right along. I want to make sure you notice, too, on your tables that we have evaluation forms, that we would appreciate you just jotting some comments down, if you would, with those, just while we're here. We are going to probably run over just a little bit here with the questions that are brought in, but just take your time to get those done, and if you're ready, let's get started. Okay.
Hey, there's a question. Are there any plans to educate the Oklahoma legislature on Islam? I'm not a miracle worker, people. I can't.
Thank you.
We don't have to stop with the Oklahoma legislature. We can. Well, I think it's important to be communicating constantly with our elected representatives at all levels. even if you feel you're a minority voice, and even if you get back the sort of standard responses, thank you for your letter, but, I'm going to disregard it now. I think it's still very important to be communicating, and there have been a number of things that have been done in terms of cultural literacy and diversity that under the previous governor were gaining some real headway. Under the current governor, some of that got sort of pushed aside, although I'm going to be at an event Tuesday night about Iran and the Middle East, where the governor is actually coming to hear a national speaker. And so I think we keep working to try and educate and encourage and let people know that we're concerned, and that we'll work to get people out of office if they don't pay attention. I mean, we have to work through the process. I got a bunch of questions here, so.
Just real quick, I do want to say that being a liberal in a Republican state feels very disheartening, but I do write my legislatures and I do challenge them in a nice way to tell me what specifically they can do to make things better. And I have gotten responses every time, and many times phone calls, maybe from their aides, but maybe phone calls that last 40 minutes.
Right.
So it makes a difference.
Thank you, indeed. Briefly talk about Spain and as a time of interfaith tolerance. I will be very brief, but to say that that is one of the shining examples under Islamic Spain, actually, where Jews, Christians, and Muslims had a kind of remarkable civilizational system. It produced Moses Maimonides and Judah Halevi and others. In fact, historically, Jews fared far better under Islamic rule than under Christian rule. That can be pretty easily, sadly, demonstrated, but I mean, from a Christian perspective, that's tragic. But Islamic Spain, and one can also look, and one has to look beyond current developments, say in Egypt or in places like Lebanon, and realize that throughout the Middle East, Christians are 15, 16 million people, and they've been there since the very first century. That's where Christianity began, and it's still there. Now, it's a minority population, probably a little less than 10% now of the population among the Arabic-speaking world. But the very fact that Christians and Muslims have lived together, and Jews too, throughout the centuries is indicative of what is possible. And there are all kinds of things that one can see historically in Jerusalem and Lebanon, in the area of Mesopotamia, what is Iraq today, and so forth, that is very heartening. It's not just one thing. There are all kinds of conflicts and problems, but there are also a lot of things, and Islamic Spain is a great illustration of that. With regard to Muslims in America, is it useful to say anything about the Sunnis, the Shiites, and so forth? It is a big part of the dynamic. There's a very helpful book, I think, called The Shia Revival by Vali Nasser that details some of that. And part of the dynamic, the Shiites constitute, and there are several kinds of Shiites, but they constitute about 15% or so of the Muslims in the world. So it's a minority within Islam, but in the area between Pakistan and Syria, Lebanon, in that arc across Pakistan, part of Afghanistan, Iran, Iraq, and on into Syria and Lebanon, the Shiites are probably more like 45% of the population. And there are some very real dynamics related to some of the conflict that's going on that run deep in terms of Sunni-Shia disagreements and power struggles and so forth. That is a part of the picture, sadly, in Syria today, for example. There are many other layers to that, but it is a part of the picture, and but it's not as simple as just, oh, the Sunnis and the Shias don't like each other. It's not that simple at all, but it does weave into the picture in various ways, and has a lot more to do with power and control, and who's had what historically where. A lot always turns on politics and economics, of course, in most of these settings. That's where you find a lot of the difficulties down through the centuries. It's not just religious. Religion often gets brought in as the kind of justification for what are economic injustices in communities that have been squeezed out in various ways. And so I guess my appeal there would be to say we need a lot more of what I call work in the dense thicket of particulars. We have to be careful about making generic statements about the Islamic world as though it's one thing. Algeria is not Afghanistan. Lebanon is not Libya, any more than Greece is Sweden, or Norway is England. These are Western European countries that are predominantly Christian, but they're not. We know enough about them to know you'd never talk about Greece and assume it applied to Sweden. We don't know enough about the Islamic world, and so when somebody pops off somewhere who may not even be a religious leader, but declares jihad, then people start going, oh, the Muslims are going to declare jihad, and the Muslims are going, well, who is that guy, and what's he talking about? But if we don't know anymore, we need to dig into the dense thicket of particulars, and this is a place I've done a lot of work in Washington over the years, and there's a lot of work to be done in that area, I'm afraid. Let's see. As an educator at the major university in Oklahoma, that wasn't, I didn't say that, but as an OSU guy, I can't quite say that, but what do you see in our, what's the word there? What's that word?
In our youth?
In our youth, I say, okay, like college students, in terms of interreligious understanding. I'm more hopeful there. I really think there's a lot more openness on the part of people in the younger demographic on a number of fronts. I mean, I've seen pretty dramatic changes in the last 25 years as a college professor on all kinds of issues. A lot less concerned about religious diversity. I mean, you do have people who are very traditional and conservative and so forth, but a lot of the issues that have been so fractious around human sexuality, for example, are not that big a deal to a lot of college-age kids. They don't quite get it. A lot of issues related to race, when they hear, racism and bigotry, it's like, what were you people thinking? What does this have to do with anything? And so that to me is a very hopeful sort of sign that they just don't get it. Like, why was that necessary? So I've been working on the Israeli-Palestinian issue for 30 years, so I'm an optimist. So I'm hopeful and think, like Sandy was saying, we keep working and doing what we can do non-violently within the structures that are in front of us to try and address the challenges. We may not be able to solve all the problems, but we can make contributions, and I think there's reasons for hope at a number of levels.
Let's do a couple more.
Okay. Yeah. What did we do about exclusivists in an age of pluralism? Well, that's a good question, and it's one of the issues, frankly, that's really central. And when the religion becomes evil book, how to wrestle with those questions I mentioned a little bit in my comments. And I really do believe very strongly that it's possible to be a person of faith with commitment, with depth, with integrity within one's religious tradition, and yet remain open to other ways that people have a worldview, see the world, and seek to live out their faith. That is possible to do. In the last chapter, actually, of that book, I talk about models of inclusivism and pluralism and exclusivism, some of the things that those in theological circles know have been, a lot has been written and is being written by serious Christian thinkers, at least, for the last 30 years. And a great deal more is being done about how to understand particularity and pluralism. And so I think this will take quite a while, and if you are a student of theology in any religious tradition, you are already well aware that not everybody's going to come to the same conclusions. It's an ongoing process, but I think a lot of that can be helped, and that was really what I was kind of alluding to in my comment, that I think a lot of our theology comes less from people sitting in an ivory tower cranking out books, and more from people engaging with other people and working out their theological understanding in practice, and then shaping their theological views around what seems much better and more consistent with what they understand as God's work in the world. Last question. Let's see. Yeah, we got that one already. Another comment on the Pew survey. Okay, let me just say one or two words. The Pew survey revealed that that 20% of the population today in the United States describes themselves as none of the above, the so-called nuns, N-O-N-E-S. So are you a Christian, a Jew, a Methodist, what are you? None of the above. And that includes people who self-identify as atheists and agnostics, but also people who just don't want to identify with a particular religious tradition. And what was dramatic about this study that came out last October was that from 5 years before, and these are very detailed, very sophisticated studies, that number had gone up from 15% of the population to 20% in 5 years, or a 33% rise in people who say they don't identify with any form of organized religion. Well, that's a very significant jump. And it's particularly dramatic in the younger demographic. So the 18 to 25-year-old group is dramatically different than, say, the World War II age generation, where only 1 in 20 people would say they were none of the above. Now the whole population is, 1 in 5 who would claim that. And so some of the study showed that a lot of the frustration with organized religion was because of the perception of religion in politics, the kind of strict rules and regulations, the kind of images they see on TV from the religious right or from Islamic extremists or whatever, that if that's what religion is, I don't want that. Because interestingly, the number of people who are atheist and agnostic or self-described, that has ticked up, but the large majority of people who say none of the above, 68% say they believe in God or some higher power. Over half of them say they pray regularly. So it's not that atheism is just running rampant through the land, although we've had a spate of best-selling books by what I call evangelical atheists in the last few years. And I have a few things to say about them in the first chapter of one of my books. But I mean, people are more than welcome to have their opinion, but the way I think they set up religion in a very simplistic way, assuming that if you're not, that the only way to describe a Christian is some kind of rabid fundamentalist, that if you don't believe that a snake talked to somebody in a tree, then somehow, you're not really a religious person, that you have to believe that to be a follower of Jesus. Well, they set up these kind of, false dynamics. That's true for some people, but obviously a large number of people have a little more, I would say, sophisticated understanding than a literal interpretation of everything, which, by the way, I will go ahead and throw this out since I've got a captive audience for a minute. One of the things I say in one book is that nobody takes the Bible literally at every point. Nobody. Anyone who says that is either ignorant or disingenuous or both. Now that's one of those controversial comments that
That's right. That's going to get on the news tonight.
And I thought I would get attacked for that, because a lot of real conservative people have read my books and go after things. Nobody touches that one. And it's interesting because you can't take the Bible literally at every point. It's impossible to do. And every now and then, and so if we have any fundamentalists, deep, committed fundamentalists in the crowd, and you want to challenge it, I'll go ahead and challenge it for you. Then up say, I take it, well, no you don't. Jesus says, I am a door. A screen door, sliding glass door, what kind of door is he? Moses used to speak to God face to face as a friend. Later in the same chapter, Moses says, show me your face. God says, no one can see my face and live. And so he passes by and lets Moses see his back, but not his face. Well, which is it? No one sees the face of God, or Moses used to speak to God face to face? Well, probably as a friend is the tip-off. It's a metaphorical way of talking about an intimate relationship. But those are easy. There are thousands of those. The clincher that shuts everybody up, Jerry Falwell and others, I can't pick on him. My mother taught me not to speak ill of the dead. I used to go opposite him on CNN and stuff, which was always great fun, because I didn't even have to prepare. I just said, what's your position, Jerry? I'll take the other side. And I'm pretty sure I'm right. Ask somebody this who thinks they take the Bible literally. Explain how you take the Song of Songs literally.
Yes.
It's an erotic love poem. If you haven't read it, it's pretty good. You ought to go take a look. There's a lot of good stuff in the Hebrew Bible that a lot of people haven't read, it turns out. It's an erotic love poem between a man and a woman. God is not mentioned in the Song of Songs. Well, that's a metaphor of God's love for Israel. a metaphor is not taking it literally.
That's right.
So let's be honest.
Yeah.
We all draw the lines in different places, but most of the people who make those sort of claims are people who haven't read the Bible. But they'll rip your throat out if you say the Bible isn't literally true. Again, it's a matter of ignorance and breaking through the sort of fear that many people have. And so part of the plea is we have to raise the level of education and not be afraid to talk about some issues and challenging things that may be a little uncomfortable for some in our family or in our neighborhood. You can imagine I'm a lot of fun to have at a Thanksgiving dinner. You know, start stirring the pot up a little bit. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.